There we go. Welcome, everyone, to the May Lunch with NEMA. This is Heather in the NEMA offices here in Arlington, Mass. If you just want to type in where you're actually listening in from, that would be great in the chat feature. This is also a little bit of a new interface for us, so still trying to figure out the ins and outs of it, so if we make any mistakes, I apologize now. Great, you guys are all coming in from all over. This is also one way that you guys will be asking any questions, so if you have any questions at all for any of the presenters, go ahead and type them right into the chat feature, and I will be passing along that message. Great, and as with all Lunch with NEMA, this one will be recorded and available on the NEMA website later on this afternoon if you have to pop out early or if you want to share it with your colleagues. We are more than willing to encourage that. So to get going, we're going to be talking about Culture for Climate, how to make your institution, how your institution can make a difference with Sarah Sutton with We Are Still In, Rodney Rowland, Director of Facilities and Special Projects at Strawbery Bank Museum, and Steve Smith, Director of Animal Care and Facilities at Echo Lake Center for Lake Champlain. I cannot talk today. So we definitely have a broad range of people on here. But I want to turn it over to Sarah now. I'm not sure if you guys know Sarah or not, but she is a wonderkin in the greening of museums and sustainable museums. And she recently just won an award from AAM. So congratulations on that one, Sarah. So I'm going to pass it on to you now.
Thank you very much, Heather. Let's see, we'll flip it up to here.
There we go.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm on the West Coast, but I spent 20 years in the NEMA region, and you might have known me then in my previous life as Sarah Brophy, and I'm the same person. I'm now Sarah Sutton. I'm still a sustainability consultant on environment and climate, but I've added to that being the cultural sector lead for We Are Still In. So I want to tell you a little bit about that today and then hand it over to two representatives of two institutions that are showcases for this kind of work, specifically chosen because one's a history museum and one is a science museum, to demonstrate that the whole range of museums can participate and contribute to solving climate problems, whether you're an art museum, science museum, children's museum, history museum, zoo, or aquarium. So let me tell you a little bit about We Are Still In. So We Are Still In is both a declaration and a coalition. It's a declaration that institutions, whether they're from academia, health programs, the private sector, their states, tribes, cities, and cultural institutions, support the Paris Agreement. This is the largest coalition ever brought together in support of climate action. And there are two things I want to tell you about, two terms today that I'll use that I want to clear up some issues about. Climate action is not necessarily activism. It is taking steps in order to reduce your impact on climate. And being part of the cultural institution and supporting the Paris Agreement is a choice by each institution based on their mission and their interests. So let me tell you a little bit about the history. So on the 1st of June in 2017, when the United States president announced his intention to withdraw the United States from the Paris Agreement, it seemed to me that those of us who care about these issues will do it anyway, whether or not we have federal support or a federal mandate. And so I created something called Museums for Paris, and I called up a bunch of people that I knew, clients and professional peers, and said, would you do this with me? And they said yes. And suddenly I had more people than I realized than I could manage, I realized, and I started looking for a partner. And right at that time, We Are Still In went public. And but it went public without a category for museums. And I started knocking on their door and asking them to include us. And it took a while, but in February of 2018, they adopted museums as part of the larger cultural institution sector to add the public engagement aspect. Now, this is sort of a long list, and it doesn't really matter, all of these names on here, except to tell you that there are a whole lot of other sectors and other leaders supporting this work that now cultural institutions are a part of. The day-to-day work usually comes out of the World Wildlife Fund, and that's where there's a staff, team members who help me do my work for the cultural institutions sector. Now, this will tell you about how many people are currently present. We've got 59 cultural institutions that have signed on, and after the last AAM conference, I know of 10 more who are interested and are beginning the process with their institutions. Here's an example of some of the representatives from the sector who are currently signed on. You'll see New England Museum Association was the first regional museum association to step up and sign on to the agreement.
I also want to just point out how many people in New England are signed on. That's pretty awesome.
Yes. We have a very strong showing in New England.
Yep.
So what's the purpose of cultural institutions in what we unfortunately called WASI, which is the We Are Still In group? They align the abilities, the resources, and influence of our sector with the work and resources of other sectors to help communities understand their connection to environment and climate and to prepare for a changing climate. And they use education, research, and communication to foster individual, collaborative, and collective action, all three of those things, from every sector to pursue an equitable approach for significant environment and climate impact. Excuse me. So you'll see as we go on today that there are individual actions you take, but that the collective and collaborative work is just as critical. And different institutions take on different activities at different times. I believe that this is a benefit for you because it demonstrates your relevance to concerns that are in your community right now. And it also gives you tools and access to tools and information for doing this work. So you don't have to invent it yourself or figure it out yourself. You can identify peer mentors in the field or in other sectors to help you do this work. And you have a platform for sharing this work with others. I also believe that in the next year to 18 months, this is going to give us access to funding to help us do our work better. So what is the We Are Still In Declaration? It's a little bit longer than what you see now, and you can find it on the We Are Still In website, but the most important parts are in red. We continue to support climate action to meet the Paris Agreement. Fighting climate change brings significant economic and public health benefits as well as environmental ones. And it's important that the world know that the US still supports this work regardless of choices at the federal level. So what's your job if you sign on to We Are Still In? First is to sign the declaration. Then you may choose to establish some commitments. And I'm just going to quickly run through what some of them are, and then the folks who follow me will talk about the work they've done. It's important for you to understand that these commitments were developed working with the field to identify characteristics of excellence in sustainability in museum work. And then those characteristics were aligned with the other sectors' works in order to support the Paris Agreement. A lot of them are about energy, but they don't all have to do with energy. Here are two examples. Committing to increasing your use of renewable power, whether you generate it or buy it or get energy credits. Or, for example, hosting a cross-sectoral forum at your institution to talk about it. And we'll see examples of both of those today. This is a short list of some of the others. And the reason I'm flying through this is that I want you to hear from the folks who are doing some of this work on the ground. And also you'll be able to find this on the website and through pre-recorded webinars that are hosted at the American Alliance of Museums website. This is an example, and I've got two more slides that will show you about the We Are Still In website. So you can find this at wearestillin.com, and it'll walk you through how to take action, take climate action. These are the same links that help you start signing on. If you're new to the site, you go through this portal. If you've already signed on and you're coming back to change your commitments or update contact information or to add a story, then you go through the already signed on portal. And this little panel right here that shows you where you are in the application process, how you get to your final version of what you've submitted, and then where you have access to all the resources on the website for information how to do more of this. So before I pass it on, I just want to remind you that you have a friend in doing this work, that I am happy to help you walk through the whole sign-in process, to have a conversation with you about what it is, what you'd like to do, maybe even beam into a board meeting or a staff meeting to talk to you about it and let you think through the process of what your participation would be for We Are Still In. Thanks, and now I'll hand it off to Rodney.
Hello, everyone. So my approach to this presentation is that I want to show how we are still in Strawbery Bank. Our real focus, for the most part, is the shared approaches, the collaborative and collective actions. We strongly believe, and I think as we've been going through this process, I know that the best solutions to the problems caused by climate change are going to come from a group effort, from a community effort. We can't do this alone. It is next to impossible, and even if you do come up with solutions on your own, you'll probably find that better solutions are found in a group setting, in a community setting. So just to make that point, we're going to go back in time to Strawbery Banke Museum. Apologize for the quality of this slide, but this is from a video taken in 1966, showing 3 of the historic houses at Strawbery Banke Museum: the Loud House on the left, the Sherburne House in the center, and the Shapley-Driscoll House on the right. The Sherburne House is the oldest structure at Strawbery Banke, the second oldest house in the city of Portsmouth. They matter. And so we fast forward to 2005, and you can see those 3 structures in the background looking quite a bit different. Now, you have to remember the amount of effort and money and passion that went in to getting those houses and the other 30 plus houses at Strawbery Banke into the condition they are today. A large group of people, staff, donors, boards, dedicated to preserving this very important historic site. And we continue to develop from having an outdoor skating rink in the wintertime that welcomed 23,000 people last year. And again, those houses in 2014 as they continue to prosper. Those particular houses really represent Strawbery Banke as it is today, in that they have some rental studio apartments in part of the Loud House. They have commercial offices that we've rented in part of the Shapley-Driscoll House. And the rest of this space is dedicated to exhibitions and a furnished exhibit in the Shapley-Driscoll House. So it really is all what Strawbery Banke is today, and so therefore really important to us. Just a beautiful shot of Strawbery Banke Museum looking toward the east with the beautiful Piscataqua River in the background, which unfortunately is the root of all of our problems. So this is 2016, and today we have problems. The water is simply everywhere these days. It's been impacting areas that we were not expecting. It's a combination of surface water jutting up right against to our buildings, and of course groundwater bubbling up from underneath, most of it salt water coming in underground from the Piscataqua River. This kind of inundation is really hurting our historic houses. It would be very damaging to a brand new home. So you can imagine homes that have been on their original foundations for hundreds of years, the impact is that much more. So, and we're seeing deterioration, especially in the basements, in the form of mold and mildew, brick and mortar deterioration, metal columns delaminating. So it's a very serious problem. And it makes me wonder, if we don't all take action, we don't all step up and try to find a solution, is Strawbery Banke going to look like this way down the road? So when I talked about a collective approach, I found this op-ed piece in the New York Times by Mr. Ban Ki-moon and Francis Suarez, and it really strung a chord with me, because their point was just that effective adaptation is a collective endeavor, that a holistic and long-term approach is going to be needed, and long-term planning. This is how we're going to make the best solutions to these problems, these impacts. Forging partnerships, absolutely crucial. And that it really makes sense for everybody to be involved, because there isn't a single aspect of our daily lives that isn't affected by climate change. And if you don't believe that, I think you just wait, because it will happen. I can promise you, when I started at Strawbery Bank 30 years ago, we did not have the impacts that we're having in our basements at this point. So I really do believe that a collective and collaborative effort is the best results. Strawbery Bank, we needed help. We don't know how to address these issues. We weren't trained as engineers. So we started by trying to put the word out. This was an editorial that we wrote for the Portsmouth Herald, the local paper, which led to a fantastic article in Yankee magazine, which featured several cultural and natural sites, resource sites around New England, and their impact from rising seas. Strawbery Bank was fortunate to be chosen as one of those locations. This really got our phones ringing, our emails coming in with offers to help. And one was We Are Still In. And what I really like about We Are Still In is it is really the core focus of that collaboration, bringing people together, really formalizing the process where you are encouraged to get together, learn, compare stories, share experiences, and then turn around and send those back out into the community. We started alone, and now we're not alone. The collaborative efforts are amazing, and it's really what's helped move this forward faster and faster and faster. The City of Portsmouth, an obvious partner, was forging ahead with their own adaptation strategies and research for the city, for the streets, the roads, the infrastructure. Then we met as a group and decided that together we could do a lot better. And in fact, it was Strawbery Bank who brought the issue of groundwater intrusion to their climate change table. They were focused on surface water. You can't see the groundwater seeping up, so they didn't realize that was an issue in the City of Portsmouth. Now they do. Now they're looking at that as well. Their resources are much better than ours, so what a great partnership to have that happen. And on a bigger level, the state of New Hampshire and the University of New Hampshire, the research that's needed, the data collection that is needed. That's kind of really our next point, is where's this water coming from? How often is it coming? That's what we kind of need to capture with real hard data so that we can find the best solution. So these are two of our bigger partners at this point. I also wanted to make mention of keeping history above water. If any of you have been to this conference before, I think it's in its 4th year. Please note that in the chat window. I'd be curious to see who's going, but this is by far one of the best conferences for cultural institutions struggling with the impacts of water on their historic structures. It is an excellent opportunity to really meet other people with similar problems, talk about solutions. And believe me when I say there is unbelievable work going on, especially along the Florida coast, in Annapolis, which is probably ahead of most areas, in getting adaptation strategies together. I really think you'd benefit from this conference if you're having water issues at your site, whether it be ground or surface water issues. And on it goes. Our partnerships are many and varied, and each person brings a unique perspective and an exciting perspective to the table, and we're really grateful for that help. So that's sort of the outreach part of this, the collaboration part of this. But we are starting the adaptations part because of this partnerships, and that's what's really exciting. So here we have the Jones House, the 1795 Jones House right on Puddle Dock. It was experiencing both water inundation from the surface water, which you can see in the upper left. The bulkhead was allowing water to come in like a big waterfall. And we also have minor groundwater issues too from the Piscataqua River. So this is Dr. Alex Martin, our archaeologist, who helped us excavate along that bulkhead. And basically what we needed to do was change the elevation of that bulkhead so that there was quite a bit of relief or above grade exposure to keep the water out. So here they are putting the finishes touches on it with a brick veneer and lining the foundation and the side of the bulkhead with a pond liner so that even if the water soaks into the ground, it isn't able to get through the foundation itself. So that was a good fix for us. This should buy us at least some time. I'm not sure it's the final story for the Jones house, but it certainly will buy us some time. And the last piece was to try to control some of that humidity, because it's not just the water, the standing water, but we're measuring relative humidities in our basements of 80 to 90% for a 6-month period of time. And that's just not good for anything in the house or the house itself. So trying to control that humidity and trying to dry out whatever moisture comes into the building is very important as well. Another adaptation strategy is just to try to keep the water out. This is called dry proofing. We have successfully installed this in the loud house, that's the picture on the right, and in the wind house on the left. And basically, it's putting a perimeter drain under a concrete cap, and that allows the water to go into that perimeter drain and be removed from the basement, but it keeps the water and the relative humidity out of the space. But I do want to say that there was a cost, and that's really the part that we're dealing with now is what are we going to lose to prepare these houses for change in our climate. If you look at that basement on the right in the loud house, there used to be a beautiful summer kitchen, a hearth that was built in 1790, and that's now gone. It was too far compromised by the saltwater intrusion, and we needed to preserve the rest of the historic chimney. So we put in a granite base that prevents that water from wicking up. So there is a cost to this, but that's part of this discussion is where can we find compromises and where can we find the best solutions that don't jeopardize the majority of our history. So we are working on other things along with the we're still in. And some of the things you can see listed here, one of the ones we're most proud of is we're now buying all of the energy for our 9-acre campus from wind power. That represents 714,000 kilowatt hours of power that's coming from the wind that's generated in the United States. We're focusing on some zone dampeners on our furnaces, which is kind of like microclimates, so that you're not turning the heat on and off from one location in a 7-8 room house. Each room can call for heat as it's needed. It's a much more efficient way. LED lighting, of course, is very simple and easy to do. Light timers, photo eye, recycling, composting. Our cafe is now selling reusable straws, trying to reduce our plastic usage and going much more with reusable rather than recyclable. Low water fixtures and Energy Star appliances in our apartments. So those are just some of the things that we're working on in addition to everything else. But really, as I said, our focus is to bring the community together. In the next couple of months, I'm going to be reaching out to the city of Portsmouth and asking them to formalize a committee that Strawbery Banke will be the lead of and part of, so that we can formalize these discussions and meet several times a year and see what we're doing and finding out what the next steps are going to be. So, and of course, there is a money component to all of this. So as part of the capital campaign, we have a sea level rise initiative, and that's really trying to keep our history, the history of Portsmouth, above water, and find the best solution and the long-term solution for Strawbery Banke Museum. Because the last thing we want to do, of course, is to end up looking like this in who knows how many years. So thank you. With that, I guess I'll pass it on to Steve.
Thank you. Thank you. Incredible to learn what goes on behind the scenes.
And then if you guys do have questions, do you guys want to ask questions now, or do you want them later towards the end, so we can ask both of you guys questions?
Either way, I mean, I think Sarah thought it'd be best to wait till she said maybe to have one or two during the presentation, which is fine, if there are questions.
Okay. So if anybody has any quick questions, or we can wait until after Steve gives his presentation, and then we can ask questions of both of them. I'm not seeing any typing right now, so we will switch over to Echo.
We're done. Okay, there we are.
There you go.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Steve Smith. I'm Director of Animal Care and Facilities at ECHO, and really glad to be a part of this initiative. I and Echo are sort of naturals for this kind of initiative. My background prior to coming to Echo was in the zoo community. The passion in my career has always been about environmental stewardship, so Echo was a good fit, and I really enjoy working here. I wanted to start out with an image of Echo, but I didn't want to start out with one of those 5 a.m. sterile shots where nobody's standing there, because this sort of represents our commitment to environmental stewardship. And this was Vermont has a green up day throughout the state, and this is just one event where the mayor came down and we had school groups here and they cleaned up the waterfront. And we were a part of all that. So the whole part about climate change and keeping the initiative to prevent climate change and climate resilience, it's just a natural part of what we do. And it's also, we're lucky because in Vermont, it's very much a natural part of the community here. So we're very fortunate that it makes it a little easier for us to do. One of the more recent things we did, the lower right image, there's actually 3 solar canopies there. Can folks see my mouse?
Yep.
Okay. So we have the 3 solar canopies here on the right that are sort of carports, and they generate 160 kilowatts. And then we also, years ago, put solar on our rooftop that generates about 30 kilowatts. I also wanted to point out that we have skylights that run down the center of the building. And underneath this skylight, I'll talk about a little bit later, we do have a photo cell here that's utilized in some of our energy conservation measures. This is very expensive to do, but working with Encore Renewable Energy, a local firm in Burlington, we arranged for financing, as we did with the rooftop solar, where we don't actually own the solar for the first 6, 7, 8 years, and we actually don't get credit for the energy that they produce. But we still are generating energy that's getting fed back into the system. So we are doing things to reduce consumption. After 6 or 7 years, we are able then to purchase this from those who financed it when we weren't able to pay for it. So if anybody's interested in what those types of arrangements are, if you're not familiar with them, I might be able to give you a little bit of insight into that, or I'll send you over to our CFO who should be able to help you with that. The other thing that we did when we paved the parking lot is underneath this edge, which is to the west, and then underneath, well, not underneath this one, but way at the south end of our lot, we have stormwater gardens. And so this one captures the water coming off of the solar as well as the parking lot. We paved the parking lot, which seems counterintuitive to trying to go green. But what was happening when we had this green parking lot was in this inlet right here, there is a catchment in the parking lot here, and there's a little bit of drainage that comes back this way and a little bit that comes from our driveway. And we would see these plumes of sediment that would be dropping into the water. And so we wanted to do something to correct that. When we did all this work, there was some federal funds involved, some state funds through the city of Burlington, and we had to be very careful. This was an old industrial waterfront, and so there was a lot of potential issues with toxins in the soil. And so we had to do a lot of testing of the soil. And what was most interesting is most of our problems were right below the surface or at the surface. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are actually a byproduct of fossil fuel burning. So most of it was coming off of cars, which makes that plume that was going out into the lake that much more problematic. So now all the drainage goes into these stormwater gardens. Stormwater gardens then lead in the southwest corner to a little bay, and that also does some catchment before the water heads out into Lake Champlain. We're very close to Lake Champlain, so we have to be very careful about what we do. And the water level is very high, so we have to be very careful what we do. So we did the solar, we did the stormwater gardens, and then part of the environmental stewardship messaging, all of this will be interpreted by our education department. There'll be graphics, they're not up yet because this is so new. but would all be interpreted so people can understand what we're doing and what they can possibly do to reduce their impact on the environment and on climate. In terms of reducing consumption and waste, another of the commitments we have, we did actually install one of these bottle fillers. And when we did that, we stopped selling water in plastic bottles. So we encourage people to use these fillers. On the right, this picture here, when we built ECHO many years ago, we reused some of the materials from the old science center that used to be here. So this was some of the wood, which was now made into a boardwalk. And these are all things anybody can do if they're doing any renovations or new constructions. The other thing that we did in terms of reducing consumption, and Rodney talked to this as well, is every metal halide light over an aquarium, every halogen bulb over one of our exhibit displays, and every fluorescent light in every office, everything was changed to LED. And that's pretty simple to do, and often through your local utility company or your state or other municipalities, there are rebate programs that can help with the cost of those. Another thing we do to reduce consumption, this is an aquarium. We have about 20,000 gallons worth of water that we're constantly filtering. We use city water. Thankfully, the city of Burlington only uses chlorine to disinfect the water. A lot of municipalities have switched to, I can't remember the name of it now, chloramine. Chloramine is a combined chemical, both ammonia and chlorine, and they often have switched to it when they're sending water to far outlying areas. Chlorine dissipates more readily, and so by the time the water was getting to some homes, it was no longer carrying enough chlorine to be safe, so they switched to chloramines. Chloramines can be a big problem for aquariums because it's much harder to remove. Anybody who's ever had a fish tank and used municipal water, the easiest thing to do is to fill a gallon jug, let it sit overnight, and the chlorine dissipates. Well, we're talking about volumes of water, 4,000, 6,000 gallons of volume. And we could use sodium thiosulfate to dechlorinate our water, as I've done in the past in some zoos that I've worked with, and working with marine mammals. But instead, what we choose to do is manage our water very carefully and our water use very carefully. If we use the chlorinated water with any frogs or fish, because of the high absorption rates amphibians have, and through the gills of the fish, we'd be killing all of them. And so we can't do that. But just in how we manage our water, we aerate the water and it's circulated throughout the building. And we naturally dechlorinate. In the winter, it takes 2 to 3 days. In the summer, the water is a little warmer. Here in Vermont, we actually get alarms. Our incoming city water is too cold for the fish, so we have to circulate it for a while. But so we don't use sodium thiosulfate. We don't have the chemical byproducts that would be in the water after removing the chlorine, and we're not putting that out in the lake. And we're not encouraging the use of the fossil fuels that would be needed to get those pallets of sodium thiosulfate here. So it's just another of the ways that we just try to reduce our chemical use here. A lot of institutions, when they first bring animals into their collection, they quarantine them as we do. Many institutions also have prophylactic treatments for ectoparasites, internal parasites, all kinds of things. And what we opt to do instead, one, for the sake of the animals, to reduce the stress on the animals, and two, to just reduce the chemical use, is we just quarantine for 30 days and observe. And if we see no signs of any sort of issues, then we transfer our animals to the collection. So again, we're just trying to eliminate or reduce our chemical consumption. The big thing that ECHO has that I was introduced to when I first came here was Automated Logic's web control. This is a software package that I had no experience with when I first came here. I was a zoo guy when I came here. I could tell you all about elephants and snow leopards, but I had no experience with this kind of thing. But working with our local vendors, who we were very fortunate to have, they were geniuses with this. They taught us what we needed to know, and I've been working with it for almost 20 years now. And this is
Steve, can you talk a little bit louder?
Okay. Is this any better? Is that better?
Yep, that's definitely better. Thank you.
Okay, so this is the home page, and on the right or the first and second floors of Echo, there's about 26 different zones. Each of them has their own climate control parameters that we can manipulate. In the dark field on the left, you can see the heating water, the chilled water, the air handler, and then some other features. The life support for the animals is down on the lower left. And all of this we manipulate to reduce our energy consumption throughout the year. This is a depiction of our air handler. This is incoming air coming from outside right here, and it goes into the building, then it gets dispersed into those 26 zones. This is the air coming back out of the building. This is the air that comes from the bathrooms, the kitchens, the custodial. And we do reuse some air, but we have that nasty air going right out. We don't reuse that. This is an energy recovery wheel. When the software thinks it's appropriate, and most of the time I agree with that, this will come on. And so in the winter, when we're pumping out potentially 72-degree air, some of it comes back. Some of it goes through this fan, which is running. And the fan is sort of like a 4-inch thick, 6-foot tall. It looks sort of like a car radiator, but it's made out of paper. And so the heat energy is caught and then rotated back down to the incoming air. And there's a temperature sensor right here. And we'll see the heat gain between the outside air temperature and this. And so it can be very effective. We do some manipulations with it after working with it for many years. This is 30% minimum outside air. In the dead of winter in Vermont, when it's minus 10 degrees on a nasty day, we don't like a minimum of 30% outside air, and we'll bring that down a little bit, which can reduce our consumption of natural gas. And these are just manipulations we do, and we watch our consumption. We look at our consumption, and then we compare it to what the weather is, what the weather records are for a year ago versus this month. And then we can see how we're doing if there's more we need to do with this system. But it's a great system to work with. And it's not, it can be something you just plug in and then you wait for the alarms when something's wrong, or you can work with it to optimize the system. Because though it's a software system and though it's done by these high-tech engineers, sometimes they don't get everything just right. And sometimes you can question what's going on and maybe improve what's going on. This is from that same software package. This is a depiction of the chilled water system. So on the lower part here is a 70-ton chiller that produces cold water that goes into our air handler, which then gets distributed to all the zones. And some of it also goes to the system that chills our fish water. In the summer, we will run this large system, but in the winter, we shut it down and we go with these smaller heat pumps. And the software will turn 1 on or 2 on, depending upon the load, and then it chills our fish water. And this is also an automated system, but when we're what's called in the shoulder season, whether it's spring or fall, sometimes this piece of equipment comes on when it's not quite needed because it's only 68 degrees out. And we watch that and we'll force it to stay off until we start to feel like it's getting a little toasty in the building, and then we might fire it up. Or we would just wait for other staff members to start complaining to us. We also have part of our energy savings is Keeper Enterprise lighting software, and this was by Cooper. I think Cooper's been bought out by somebody, though. I'm not quite sure. And what this is the image from the software screen. What this is a normal system. You have a circuit breaker, and then the circuit breaker, from the circuit breaker to the line, to the load, you have your electric lines, and that's all there is. With this system, what you do is you put in between the breakers and the load a relays, a whole system of relays that are controlled by the software system. And the software system, I mentioned earlier when we were looking at the roof skylights, that there was a photo cell in one of those. So we can set a parameter for the skylight at a certain lumen, a high-end lumen, a low-end lumen. We can then link different lights to that photo cell and have them come on when the building starts to get dark, like in the winter and we're still open. And we can have only certain sets of lights come on for certain parameters for that photo cell. And then we can set up another switch with another set of parameters for that photocell for other lights to come on. So you don't turn everything on when it starts to get dark. You try to slowly bring it back up or slowly keep it well lit. And you can also have it set up to time schedules. And so we do that where a lot of things have to come on for our custodial staff who come on at 5 in the morning, but not everything. So we use headlamps here often. And then we have everything start coming on at about 9:30, which gives us about a half hour to make sure that everything's working properly before we open the doors at 10. I was once followed into the building by a board member, and it was 7 in the morning, and it was still kind of dark in the building. And he sort of jokingly complained to me that it's very dark in the building, and I said, "No, it's not. It's green." The other thing that we have is our education. When we talk about climate change and we talk about environmental stewardship, our animal care department, we not only take care of the animals, we do public programming twice a day. And in that public program, we'll talk about natural history of species, but we also talk about environmental change and environmental impacts on animals. And we use a lot of different means to create the message. This was just a fun thing we did. When you put new fish in a habitat, you got to teach them where the glass is. They don't always figure that out very well. And we used to put black plastic up and cut holes in it, but then we thought, well, this would be more fun. And so we put the messaging in the window, and we let guests and volunteers do some of the artwork on the window. So we left that there for a few days, but that's just sort of a demonstration of the messaging we do. So we talk in our messages. We'll talk about microplastics when we're doing a fish demo. We recently started talking about the Clean Water Act, where there's an initiative to change the definition of the waters of the U.S., what are protected waters. Some of the headwaters that are critical habitats for some species are not going to be protected anymore. Some different bodies, well, it was significant. I won't go into too much detail on that, but it was significant changes were going to happen that were going to affect wildlife. So we use that opportunity. There are animal ambassadors, and it allows us to do our environmental messaging. And we also talk about climate change and the impact on amphibian emergence in the spring. That we work with Jim Andrews, who's a biologist in the state of Vermont, and he documents when animals are coming out of hibernation. And it's changing when they're coming out of hibernation, probably based on climate change. And we want people to know that. We want our guests to know that. And the last piece that I am going to talk about, because there's running out of time, this was a favorite slide that I found last night. We have a lot of different initiatives here with different groups. And we have a clean water network that we started convening at ECHO. It's just different entities throughout the state, bringing them together to share what's going on. And then we have something called the Leahy Summit that every 2 years they meet. 1 year after one of the hurricanes, that the remnants of the hurricane came up here and caused a lot of floodings, the Leahy Summit was all about resilience and what can be done. And maybe we don't want the riprap on all the bends and the creeks. Maybe we want to have floodplains so we don't wipe out towns. And then this year, it was a great one because it was tying in art with environmental stewardship, with clean water. And so there's opportunities like that where it's not only the science, but it's sort of merging two different things to just bring about that awareness in a group of people that might not be focused on that. It just highlights that. So with that, I think I've covered a lot of what we do here.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Those were
Steve.
two great presentations. And, you know, it's my job to know a lot about what's going on, and I've been taking notes through both of them for new things that I've learned. So thank you very much for those.
Welcome.
Let's see. So Heather, can we swap to my last, just 2 slides?
Yep.
I want to make sure everyone has our contact information. We bump it one more, and I'm just going to show you the next slide, and then I'll come back to this. The next slide, which I'll hover over at the end, is about a similar webinar happening, well, a webinar happening tomorrow on carbon measurement and offsets for cultural institutions. We've got Mark Olowski out of Boston talking about sustainable endowment from the Sustainable Endowments Institute talking about project management carbon carbon measurement for projects. And then Miguel Naranjo from UNFCCC, they call it, UNF Framework for Climate Change Convention, will be talking about carbon measurement. But I'm going to go back to this one so that you have our contact information. And then how about questions? Any questions to type in from the field? Or stories you want to tell us about things you're doing?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think those floodwater pictures at Strawbery Bank was a little scary looking.
Yeah, we've been using that a lot. And in fact, I didn't put a slide in, but there's one of the cooperative efforts was between Strawbery Bank, the city of Portsmouth, and the Rockingham County Planning Commission. They've been putting up signs, pedestrian signs, in all of the New Hampshire seacoast communities, Seabrook, Rye, Northampton, Hampton, and now Portsmouth and Strawbery Bank, that show the projected sea level depths using the legs of the sign, and that picture of Strawbery Bank, the surface water flooding, is the single image that's on the sign. So pedestrians walking along Strawbery Bank and Prescott Park on Monster Street can see this sign and understand that the impacts that might be expected if there isn't some proactive movement toward adaptation.
Rodney, I'd love a couple visuals of that if you could share, please.
Yes, absolutely.
I can use that in my climate communication conversation. All right, and
Absolutely.
I see that we've got a question that come in. Rodney, can you see your chat to respond to it?
Let's see.
Boston has so this was from Dan.
Okay.
Boston has a Green Ribbon Commission enlisting cultural institutions in climate change dialogue. I think Portsmouth has something like that going too, right, Rodney? Are any other examples of local efforts?
Yes, Dan, that's absolutely true. In fact, the Boston Green Ribbon Commission was well represented at the Keeping History Above Water Conference in St. Augustine last month, I think. I've lost track, but yes.
Good for them.
And they gave a great presentation on their efforts, which are just amazing. You want to talk about community. They've got so many different partners working on this effort. Portsmouth is the same way. They've got they have a sustainability person, Peter Britz, who's in charge of their efforts, and he's doing an unbelievable job. And now we've got people like Strawbery Bank at the table, along with the University of New Hampshire, along with the state of New Hampshire, the Department of Environmental Services, and there's a couple of other New Hampshire departments there as well. So yes, we're all working together. I just want to see it a little bit more formalized. I think we actually need to sit at a table, maybe a couple times, 2-3 times a year, just to make sure we're in constant communication about what's going on and sort of next steps. So yes, there are in our area other examples of local efforts.
And Steve, up in Vermont, because I know Vermont is very much green, do you have other commissions like that that you know of, or is it just kind of ingrained in the entire process in that area?
There is something that we just signed up for, and I cannot for the life of me remember the name of the organization right now. And I'm sorry, I just can't remember it, but we just did sign up for something where we're...
There's probably some long name.
Yeah, and I thought I had my browser open. I could sneak away from this and see it, but I don't. Well, I have this page open, so sorry.
No, that's fine. Does anybody have any other questions? Because I know, we did cover quite a bit of information from 2 very different organizations, both dealing with water in some way or another.
Can I make one more point?
Oh, yep, go for it.
It's not, and I just want to make the point that it's not necessarily only going and listening and hearing what other institutions are doing, but sharing your stories. That's been a huge part of what Strawbery Bank is doing, is letting people know what's going on. because what you do is you meet people and you find out there's other people in the same boat, and you find out that people are, they've started some adaptation strategies you hadn't considered. And so just getting out there and listening and telling your stories. I had the opportunity to do a TEDx talk in April, which will hopefully be up on YouTube soon, but it just really gives you a chance to expand your audience and meet people and talk to people who may be having the same experiences. That's really, really helped Strawbery Bank.
I also know Mystic Seaport is doing a lot of green initiatives too at the moment. I've been following them along for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
So it is great to see what, especially people in New England are doing, but also across different cultural institutions. I mean, it could be small things, it could be large things, but it's great just to see that something is happening, which needs to happen.
And it's very clear that the single most important thing anyone or any institution can do is to talk about climate issues, raise awareness, and normalize conversation around climate so that it loses its power to be political or edgy or risky, and instead is treated as a fact of life that we all have a tiny opportunity to turn to our advantage now rather than just cope with. So raising awareness among your staff, board members, visitors, community members is the single most important thing you do. And then if you're able to build awareness and skills and start to take steps internally and externally, then you're going to build some momentum. And when you partner to do that work and then advance your own work, that's where you're really going to have an impact. But we all need to start only with what is available to us and then make progress from there. And if you're having any guilt about what you haven't done yet, please let go of the guilt because it just interferes with progress. Choose a place to start and join us.
The other thing that working with wildlife, I think when you're dealing with climate change, sometimes it can't be defined enough for people to walk that walk. They're not sure. If they're not deniers, they're not sure. And so when we talk about the emergence of amphibians happening later, or last winter, there wasn't the big tick die off like there typically is in the fall. And so moose are being severely impacted by the large tick population. When you start talking about some other things that can get people to see a little sliver of real circumstances in their environment, it may make it a little more real for them.
Excellent. Great point. It has to be personal and relatable. It has to be something that you can make a connection to, or it's too hard to process.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this is great. Any last minute questions here?
Well, I'm going to pop to that last slide in case somebody was looking for it. That Zoom webinar link can get you to tomorrow's presentation, also free. Or if you need a link or a personal connection, give me a call, send me an email.
Yes, I will be putting them on the website. The presentations, I'll combine them together along with the recording will be available later on this afternoon, and along with all the other Lunch with NEMAs if you missed another one and would like to catch up. We're getting a couple thank yous here, so.
Well, and I'll add mine. Thank you for recommending that we do this program, and for the guys to joining me and showing off the good work they're doing.
Well, thank you very much for the invite.
Thank you for the invite. Very much appreciated.
Yep, thank you, all three of you guys. I mean, Sarah, I know you've been doing quite a bit of work on this one, and then also Rodney and Steve, thank you for sharing what you're doing. If they are available, if you guys need to have any follow-up questions, Sarah's definitely incredibly knowledgeable and very giving on that aspect of it. If you want to give her an email or a call and stuff.
Yeah. We like to talk about this stuff, so don't be shy.
For sure, for sure.
First step. That is definitely the first step, is starting to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
You were, Sarah, you were recommended yesterday during one of our NEMA workshops, by the way.
That is awesome to hear. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today on typical May New England day. Hope to see you guys again in a future lunch with NEMA. If you guys ever have any suggestions for any topics, please give the NEMA office a phone call, and we will see you at a future workshop, lunch, or our conference in Burlington, Vermont this November. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.